Chair's ready to start. Chair, it's okay to start.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the clock. I've got 13:59. Welcome everyone to today's meeting of the Audit Committee, which is being held fully remotely and in accordance with temporary legislation changes to allow the Council to continue operate in an open and transparent way. Decisions made at today's meeting are just as applicable as in a traditional meeting setting, provided a number of members in attendance ensures the meeting remains quorate. I would like to remind members that this meeting is being live streamed to the public. Can I request that you all switch off your cameras and mute your microphones when you are not speaking, and also ensure that you have your chat bar open for voting purposes. I have received no apologies for absence to date. If there are any other apologies that need to be recorded, please make this clear in the chat and that'll be recorded in the minutes. I'm going to move on then to the rest of the agenda. First one of which is declarations of interest. Members are to indicate expressions of interest in the chat bar, and then I would invite the member to speak to explain the nature of interest. If it's you could do it now, or we can do it as we go through the agenda where appropriate. Next item on the agenda is the public open forum. I believe that there are no members of the public who notified that they wish to be present and participate in the meeting. Next item on the agenda is the action list from the previous meeting. There are no actions left over from that meeting. So I'm going to move on then to the paper, the Whole Authority Strategic Risk Assessment, and I'd like to invite Richard Jones or Emma Davis to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon all. As the Audit Committee, you have a specific role in providing independent assurance of the adequacy of the Council's risk management framework, which is an important part of the authority's corporate governance arrangements, which you also oversee. An important report to facilitate this role is the Strategic Risk Register update that you have in front of you today. Therefore, I'd like to encourage you to use the risk assessment to consider the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements, and also the extent to which the strategic risks facing the authority are appropriately captured. The last update that you will have received was in July 2020, when we were seeing a considerable amount of disruption to service provision as a result of the coronavirus pandemic. A number of changes were made to the register at that time, including the addition of a number of risks specifically associated with the virus, and also numerous updates to the existing risks. 1 year on from the start of the pandemic, and we are still seeing significant challenges to our way of life. The Council continues to provide a range of vital services and to operate in a dynamic environment, managing and mitigating as far as possible a variety of risks to service delivery and also to the well-being of our staff and residents. So while the impact of the pandemic on the strategic risks and arrangements are very much a focus at this time, it is also important that you consider the whole range of risks and issues facing the Council currently. Due to its purpose, as you can see, the Strategic Risk Assessment is a detailed document. So Appendix 1 has provided the committee with an overview of the strategic risks on the register, including links to each of the risks in Appendix 2 for ease of reading. You will notice that there's been an update to the layout of the register, so it is hoped that this makes the document more clear to the reader. There have been a number of amendments to ensure it accurately manages the current strategic risks faced in the Council. Excuse me, the more significant of these being since the last update, financial updates in relation to the budget for 21-22, the MTFP funding associated with the pandemic, and also the potential impact on services as we go into the future. Also updates on service delivery and safeguarding arrangements for vulnerable children and adults during the pandemic, education updates, and updates to the assessment of risk as a result of the United Kingdom leaving the European Union, the review of the social justice strategy, and also amendments to the majority of COVID-19 related activity which is identified within numerous risks. You'll also see that there has been removal of 2 risks, one associated with the decline in recycling rates. This is being managed at service level, and also the removal of the risk that the authority cannot deliver its services due to the lack of business continuity planning. Updates have been made where required to the existing risks, like I say, and also to the reason why the risk has been identified, the assessed risk level, mitigating actions, and also the progress against them. It is worth noting that the risk register is a live document and contains information that is related to the ever-changing situation. So the details included were up to date at the time of publication. And it's also worth pointing out to members that the risk register is available to view at any time on the Council's hub. Thank you for your time today. Myself and Richard Jones are happy to take any questions. Those of a technical nature may need to be referred to the specialist officer outside of the meeting, but we will come back to you with an answer, rest assured. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Emma. I'll just note the recommendations for today. That members use the risk assessment to consider the effectiveness of the authority's risk management arrangements and the extent to which the strategic risks facing the authority are appropriately captured. The members scrutinise on an ongoing basis the risk assessment and responsibility holders to ensure that the risk is being appropriately managed. So I'll just put this open now for comments and questions, if anybody has any.
Can I come in, Chair? There's no hand in the chat, so.
In that case, Councillor Murphy, please come in. Okay.
Just a comment on page 15. It's risk 4B, or page 19 electronically. It refers to the locally managed school budgets carried the collective net deficit balance of 435,000 for the current financial year. It then goes on to say the latest month-line outturn statements indicate that school balances decline further, taking the overall forecast deficit to 166. Shouldn't it be improved rather than decline? It's only a point, but it might be misinterpreted.
Thank you for that. I'll leave that with Emma. Councillor Smith.
I don't know if I'm on the same page as Councillor Murphy, because I was looking at item 4A. You were making reference to schools' budgets, and I can't see that, Phil. But my query was develop and implement a commercial strategy aligned to the corporation plan, the corporate plan, right? It's making reference really to the investment committee, because my understanding was that yes, we've seen a shortfall in rents, but various expenses have been covered by the COVID expenses have been covered by Welsh Government grant. OK, and we're looking at the future when there could be uncertainty. But within that report, there's a reference, a combined overspend of 836,000. Now, does that 836,000, is it a figure that's exclusive of the other figures, not relating to the income that has been generated by the investments, basically those two big investments at Newport. So I was a bit confused about the 836k, forecasting a combined overspend of that, and then the final implementing the new procurement strategy, the next paragraph down. One little query there. An external review of the strategic procurement service has been undertaken and a report has been received. And my little question, well, where has it gone? Because I would be interested to see it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. I don't know if anybody's able to immediately come back to you on those points.
Peter Davis can answer the 835 because he'll have the figures in front of him. As regards the procurement, it went through council at the last meeting, Chair.
Okay, well, I'll bring in Peter Davis.
Thank you, Chair. So just to clarify on Councillor Smith's point, the £836,000 relates to the income shortfalls that we've seen separate to the funding we have secured through Welsh Government's COVID Hardship Fund. So the net loss that the council has suffered during the year is a lot less than that, because it has been significantly and heavily offset by the money that we've got through from Welsh Government. So hopefully that confirms on Councillor Smith's point. Clearly the impact, it's not singularly but significantly, is with Newport Leisure Park as distinct from Castlegate, and clearly the next report coming to the committee on the agenda, the next report on the agenda for the committee will obviously look at that in further detail. In terms of the beyond the point that Councillor Murphy touched on, just in terms of procurement, that is a matter that's gone to into Select Committee. It's been considered by Select Committee. I believe Councillor Murphy is also going in for individual cabinet member decision, is it not, in terms of the new arrangement with Cardiff Council?
Yeah, it is, but it was also part of the budget consultation, wasn't it?
Absolutely, but in terms of the decision to move forward with the arrangement with Cardiff, that is being presided over by way of individual cabinet member decision by yourself, I believe, Councillor Murphy. Yes. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
I thank you for that, Chairman. Peter, I don't have your background, Councillor Murphy. I'm on a very steep learning curve, left it a bit late in life to climb as well. Can I ask an additional question? And yes, I am aware of figures coming up, but it's very difficult, I find, as an elected member to trace things. Okay, I'm learning, or I might learn, you never know. Item 4B, that was registered as a high risk, and now it's down to a medium, and my one comment on that is that this includes the infrastructure. We are never going to have sufficient money. We are never going to tackle this situation, and I consider that's the most basic service of all, the most important. If you don't have a decent infrastructure, how can you deliver so many services? So I'm just surprised to see that it's gone down to medium, because it was high. I would still consider it a high risk because we do not have the money to rectify the situation. So I thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. We're very fortunate in that the questions raised so far also relate to the paper which is following on the annual performance review of the Investment Committee, and no doubt there'll be further discussion about those matters at that point. I think we're here today to examine the process of the risk register. You know, more detailed questions about the operations that are referred to within the paper would have to be referred back to the managers and originators. However, I'm happy to take any further comments or questions that we have at this stage.
No, I think there was one further back, but I can't find it at the moment. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, I've got no indication of any further questions or observations. I'll just give it a minute or two.
Oh. I have found the question. It was this related to item 13.
Yeah, go ahead, Councillor.
Yes, to satisfy my curiosity, who can restrict the connecting potential for the generation of electricity? Okay, we've got a solar farm, which is proving very satisfactory, but every now and then we have to shut it down because there is insufficient capacity to take the supply. So how is that going to be addressed sometime in the future? And I appreciate this isn't audit committee, but it's just a point that we are looking to generate income, and yet we are being restricted by some other body, and it needs a real challenge, I feel.
Okay, thank you for that observation, Councillor. I don't know, Emma, whether you've already covered this in your introduction. How do you see the role of the Audit Committee in scrutinising the risk assessment and responsibilities holders over the coming year, given that that is one of the recommendations that's before us today? Richard Jones can provide an answer to that.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the question, Chair. I think it's an important point, and I think both Emma and you've alluded to the role of the committee today in terms of your role in providing assurance of the council's risk management arrangements, of which strategic risk is an important part, but by no means the only risk management arrangements we have in place as an organisation. And other reports that come to you, such as the annual governance statement, for example, will cover those broader arrangements. So today we're asking you to consider the arrangements in light of actually receiving the whole authority strategic risk register. Emma and I work with risk owners to update the risk register, which is before you today, and look to make sure that's implemented in line with our risk management policy and guidance. It's not feasible, as I'm sure committee members can understand, to have risk owners for all 16 risks available on the call for the purpose of today. However, as a committee, you've probably got a few options for how you carry out your scrutiny of our risk arrangements. Obviously, Emma and I are here to answer any questions should they arise of a technical nature related to risk management, and if we can answer some of the rationale behind those. Obviously, if there's any specific technical points, as Emma has said, we can raise those with specific individuals responsible outside the meeting and get a response back to you. The two other options probably are worth the committee being aware of in their consideration of this is that you'll be receiving the report prior to it going to Cabinet. It's on the Cabinet agenda for the 14th of April. If there are things as part of your work today you feel need some further explanation, we can of course raise that as part of that Cabinet consideration on the 14th of April. And equally, of course, you as you regularly do, will liaise with equivalent colleagues and responsibilities via the scrutiny arrangements the council has got in place. So if there are things that the audit committee raise that need perhaps some further exploration, it could be that the consideration is given to whether that is currently or needs to be given further consideration by a scrutiny committee itself. But in doing that, Chair, it would probably be a reflection on what the specific issue is that's raised, should it be raised, of course, and where then the appropriate channel would be to investigate that further. As you say, today we've probably had a few questions that have related to items on the agenda already, where we've got some of the responsibility holders for the risk on the call to answer your questions directly of a more technical nature. So I hope that helps give some background about your options and your responsibilities and how you fulfil them.
Thank you for that, Mr. Jones. I'm not sure of the timing on this, but I've got a suggestion that Peter Davis may have a contribution. Is that still the case, or have we passed that now?
Thank you, Chair. Just refers back to Councillor Smith's, I think, latter point or observation, a reference to solar farms, and I guess ultimately there's the restrictions on the national grid that are particularly evident down in that part of the county and across South Wales, in fact. You know, our ability to be able to put in situ further significant renewable energy solutions such as solar farms, our ability to be able to actually take that energy and put that into the grid, where there is natural constraints on the national grid's infrastructure, then that's where we have those restrictions. But I guess apart from, you know, national work that will be undertaken, as well as local work that will be undertaken, and ongoing dialogue with national grid energy providers, etc. We will also be looking at battery storage and being able to actually capture the energy and hold that energy such that it can be put into the grid at a time where there is actually available capacity. So hopefully that assists with Councillor Smith's point, and is obviously part of a much wider policy ambition for the council in terms of obviously decarbonisation and the policy commitment towards the climate emergency.
Thank you. I just want to further point as chair, which Richard or Emma may want to comment on. Well, I'll let Councillor Eason, who has indicated he wants to ask a question. I'll let him come in first.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's relating back to our last audit meeting, and the risk of the coronavirus has created a risk of its own. At the last audit meeting, it was explained to us that members of the audit team have had to go into test and trace. And I'd like to ask Richard the result of the last number of months as a test and trace system or scheme, which is run by within the authority, has it eased the pressure on audit so that audit can get back to their own sort of work? And what is the overall picture with test and trace on your two issues of number 13 and 14 risks? Okay, Councillor. Well, you centred your question on those impacts on 13 and 14. So, is there anyone here who can come back on that?
Chair, I'm happy to perhaps pick up on the specific questions around the risk that Councillor Eason made, but I'm sure in terms of the specifics of whether internal audit's role, probably Mr. Wathen will have a much more informed view than I will.
He's already indicated that he's willing to speak. So do you want to yield to him?
Oh, you got a hand up now. I see. You got a hand function.
I'm happy to yield to him, Chair.
Andrew Wathen.
Thank you, Chairman. Just for members' information, most of the team were out helping out with TTP for most of the time from January onwards. But just to reassure members, from 1st of March, 80% of the team are now back in audit and undertaking internal audit functions. We've still got one longer term secondment, which is helping out with the administration of the business grants. But for all intents and purposes, the majority of the team are now back and are auditing, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Mr. Jones, is there anything else you want to add?
As long as Councillor Eason feels that point's covered, I'm happy, Chair.
Right, thank you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I can't say any more. I think you've illustrated the direction we're taking. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Okay, so back to my chair's point. I'm always quite interested in risks which appear not to be mitigated after action, after they've been considered and action taken. For instance, risk number 1, which is concerned with the authority does not remain relevant and viable for future generations. If we look at it in detail, it shows how the authority's plans have been disrupted by the pandemic, by the flooding and so on. So would you agree, or Richard or Emma, that the message is that despite the authority's best intentions, it's the circumstances that have prevented further mitigation of this risk? I read that as consistent with the covering paper, but is that the way you would see it? And if you want to comment on other occurrences where the mitigation levels haven't been reduced, I'd be happy for you to do so at this time.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think it's an important point you raise about the risk levels. And I think when Emma and I look at these with risk owners, we take into account the range of factors that influence each risk and the nature of those and how far they are within the council's control to attempt to manage, to reduce them or mitigate completely. An example you cited in risk 1, as you've already correctly said, it recognises that the mitigation action the council has tried to undertake, but other circumstances related to the pandemic have caused further issues to arise that need to be resolved. That meant at this point the risk level is assessed to show you, in that case, in risk 1's case, that we're coming to the end of the 2021 year. The risk level is assessed as low. As we look forward, and obviously as we move further into the future, there may be further uncertainties. The risk level is assessed at medium, given the current circumstances we're aware of. As with all the risks, and I think speaking to your point about other risk levels which may not have been forecast to change, we will of course keep that under review, and as our mitigating actions progress, as the environment and circumstances are in may change, we may well reassess that level of risk, but we try and act on a prudent basis, and if we don't feel we've got the evidence to show that a risk level may reduce in the time, we'll assess it to show what we can accurately display at the current time. But that's continually under review as part of our risk management arrangements and the strategic risk register.
Thank you for that. Right, well, I'm just going to give another minute to see whether anyone else wants to ask a question or make a comment. In which case, I think we can conclude that the recommendations have been accepted by the Audit Committee, as I read them out earlier. So thank you everyone for that. I'm going to move on to the next item on the agenda now, which is the annual performance review of the Investment Committee. Can I ask either Peter Davis or Deborah Hill-Howells to introduce the paper, please?
Good afternoon, Chair.
Good afternoon.
In terms of the report, I hope you've all had an opportunity to read the report, and you'll see there's quite a lot of detail in there. This is the second review of the Investment Committee, the first being undertaken last March. We've kept the template the same, just to provide you with a similar background that we did last year in terms of why we are reporting into Audit Committee today. And just as a reminder, that is as a consequence of the asset investment policy, which was established by the asset management strategy back in 2018. And subsequent to that, there have been changes to that in 2019, when the investment policy was widened to include commercial loans, development or refurbishment of holdings, and equity or debenture interest. The protocol behind the asset investment policy, and the purpose behind it is to generate net income for the authority. And within there are specified criteria in terms of the investments that we will look to acquire and the rate of returns that we would seek to recover in order to consider that as an investment that we would be interested in. The target returns being 2% above borrowing and also an annual return of around 7%. Last year, you may recall that you actually made a series of recommendations for the investment committee to consider, and I have set out in the report where we are with all of those recommendations. I hope you will be able to see that we've actually made good progress in the last year. The asset investment policy was reviewed and it was considered again by Council in December of last year. That was to enable us to review the terms of reference and build in additional responsibilities around deputies with voting rights, and also had to have reflection of our environmental responsibility, which we have now built into any investment criteria moving forward. We also, as a result of that, have made sure that we have regular updates going into investment committee. We have risk assessments which are prepared and shared with investment committee on a very regular basis. The constitution has now been updated to provide a status for the investment committee. We also now have a requirement that all advisors and officers attending investment committee now are required to sign declarations of interest. We regularly report on progress to the investment committee on the current performance of the investments, and we've also provide advice in terms of updating on legislation and guidance. And we've also as well introduced a process whereby where we have been approached for potential investments and we have made a decision that they do not meet our eligibility criteria and therefore have not progressed into a business case or investment committee, they are now reported back into investment committee, and that was done in November. In terms of the actual assets themselves that make up the investment portfolio that have been acquired through the prudential borrowing that has been made available to the investment committee, there are two property assets, Castlegate and Newport Leisure Park, and you will see in the report that I've actually sent out, put a table in there that actually explains the performance from the date of acquisition to the point that we are now. So you will have seen that Castlegate, the return of investment at the time of acquisition was 3.76%, and today it is around 3.57%. So Castlegate, throughout the pandemic, has continued to perform well. We have had a small turnover in tenants during the period that we've occupied that asset and owned that asset, but very limited turnover in tenants. We've not needed to seek any hardship funding for this asset during the last year, and the rentals have all been paid on time. The only concession that we have made is to enable tenants to pay on a monthly basis rather than quarterly in advance to enable them to manage their cash flows effectively. Newport Leisure Park is in a different situation from Castlegate, and that is largely as a consequence of the nature of the occupiers at Newport Leisure Park. Those who are familiar with it will be aware that it's largely hospitality and leisure uses. And of course, since the lockdown last year, they have largely been closed, or capacity has been significantly impacted by the social distancing requirements. We have lost a tenant on the site as a result of a CVA arrangement, and that's the former Frankie and Benny's unit. And we've also had Pizza Hut have entered into a CVA arrangement, and there has also been one of our tenants who went into administration, which was the Right Leisure Group, and a new tenant has been assigned into that unit. The consequences of these changes is that at the time of acquisition, the return on investment was 2.11%, and we now find ourselves in a position where the return on investment is 1.02%, which is below, of course, the recommended 2% within the asset investment policy. The actual occupancy of the site has also reduced from 100% at the time of acquisition to 97% at the time that we write the report. We have in investment committee considered the retention of that asset and whether that is appropriate in the short and medium term, and investment committee have continued to confirm that we wish to retain Newport Leisure Park. We understand the position that our tenants are currently in, and no one predicted the pandemic at the time that we acquired this asset. We have been able to work with Welsh Government to recover rental shortfalls through the Hardship Fund. And we've also continued to work with our tenants to ensure that they are able to trade as soon as they are able to, so that we keep them on the park and we retain good landlord-tenant relations. We also remain optimistic in terms of Newport Leisure Park because we have attracted quite a lot of interest in Unit 5, which is the former Frankie and Benny's unit, and we have now got heads of terms agreed with a new prospective occupier, and we are currently working through that process in terms of planning changes that we will need to make to the unit to accommodate their use. The report then goes on to talk about some of the changes in terms of legislation that have occurred in the last 12 months, and also makes reference to some consultation that is currently underway. So the key aspects of that is that the Prudential and Treasury Management Code, that requires us to ensure that any investments that we make are affordable, sustainable, and the risks are understood and suitably mitigated or managed. You will be aware that the Council's Treasury Policy and Strategy was approved by Council earlier this month, and that has regard to those requirements within the Prudential Treasury Management Code. The Public Works Loan Board actually changed its basis of borrowing back in November of last year, and they have now made a clear distinction that we will no longer be, or any authority will no longer be able to borrow for the purposes of buying assets primarily for yield. That will not have any immediate impact on us as an authority. Investment Committee have reviewed the basis of any investments moving forward, given the current situation we find ourselves in. And as a consequence, the Investment Committee has determined that we will only pursue any investments at this current moment in time which are grant aided or meets the policy aims of our authority. There are consultations underway in terms of changes to the Prudential Code and Treasury Management Code, and I've actually set those out in the report for you. Interestingly, as I've just said, they will align with the borrowing for debt for yield investment will not be permissible under the Prudential Code. As I said that earlier, that doesn't impact on us at the moment, but there is the potential that it will do in the future. They're also proposing new performance indicators, for instance, things like our external debt to net service expenditure and a commercial income to net service expenditure. The only other aspect I wanted to pick up with you was the Local Government and Elections Act 2021. When we've made investments acquisitions to date, we've relied on the wellbeing powers. The new Act enables us, we hope and expect to be implemented in November, of the general power of competence. That has been available in England since the 2011 Localism Act, and that will give us broader powers and enable us to act in a different way, in a more commercial way than perhaps we would have done previously. Consultation is underway on the basis of the GPC powers in Wales, and we'll get further information as we get closer to the November implementation date. You'll also be aware within the report I made reference to risk management. I think it's fair to say that we are acutely aware of the role that we have in ensuring that public funds are managed properly and appropriately, and risks assessments have been built into all of our business cases for any investment activity. And not only do we consider the risks at the time of any potential acquisition, as they are known to us at that point, but we also consider potential exit strategies so that we are aware what action we will need to take in the event that the investments no longer perform as anticipated. And then I move on into the resources, whereas I identify, as already pointed out in the report, that the ROI on Castlegate remains relatively static. ROI on NLP has reduced, but we have been able to meet this year the budget targets that we have on both assets, which is 209,000 for Castlegate and 400,000 for NLP. The latter largely due to the fact that we've been able to draw down the WG Hardship Fund. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
Thank you very much. I'll just note that the recommendations for the committee today for the Audit Committee to consider and scrutinise the second performance review of the Investment Committee, to review progress against the improvement proposals that were agreed by the Audit Committee in March 2020, and as we have done, to receive a verbal update at the meeting following consideration of the performance review by the Investment Committee at its meeting on the 24th of March. I'm not actually sure if we have had that. Could you just?
It was yesterday, Chair.
Yes. Was that input into your introduction, Deborah Hill-Howells?
My apologies, that was my admission. Yes, just to confirm that this report was presented to Investment Committee yesterday and they did endorse the content of the report.
Right, okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any comments or observations? Councillor Smith.
Can I ask? The Investment Committee, and regrettably I wanted to observe that meeting yesterday, but I wasn't able to, couldn't access it. Technology is marvellous, isn't it? So with the Investment Committee, if somebody had a superb idea, how would they actually present that proposal to the Investment Committee? I mean, what structure have we got for actual suggestions and input from any quarters? That was one thing. And the other thing that did concern me, in your the proposals that substitute members, I'm concerned that substitute members should actually be pretty au fait with what they're doing. And if somebody is just going to be selected at random to cover somebody else's absence, I don't think that's very satisfactory. I think it would be good to see a pool of substitutes who had some relevant training and background. So those are my two observations, Chairman. Yes, COVID has had a terrible impact on everybody, hasn't it? And to be regretted. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Perhaps someone can come back on either of those points.
Hello, Chair. Yeah, just to come back to Councillor Smith's points, just in terms of the first point, I guess opportunities that might arise, they sometimes come in externally. We get approaches sometimes from businesses, entrepreneurs, other public sector bodies at times when they're looking at potentially collaborative endeavours, but and equally approaches as well from members, as in councillors. So you know, they come in a variety of means. Sometimes they come through a relevant cabinet member. That's often Councillor Murphy, our chief exec, myself, even Deb as well. So but obviously it would be for officers to consider and preside over any potential opportunities before anything gets brought in front of Investment Committee. You know, it is the role of officers to obviously consider any potential opportunities and to assess as to whether they are of sufficient merit to warrant further exploration. We would engage Investment Committee tentatively and initially before we commissioned any level of due diligence, and then if we had the backing of Investment Committee, then clearly we would embark on developing a business case supported by the necessary due diligence before any decision is in fact considered. So that's the first point. In terms of the second point, just in terms of substitutes, I mean, I do appreciate the point in terms of having a pool of substitutes, but I think to the exacting point that Councillor Smith raised, just in terms of making sure that we've got a level of continuity in terms of, you know, that point in terms of experience and expertise is an important one. And you know, there's a lot of technical information that gets shared by advisors, by Deb and her colleagues into the Investment Committee, and clearly, you know, having that level of continuity, either the standing member appointed to the committee or in fact the person to substitute, I think is an important one. But it equally affords a coherent update being provided by the group leader or deputy or substitute back into the relevant group so that they can be kept informed.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Feekins.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Deb, for that very thorough report, and also thank you very much for all the work you're doing in relation to your portfolio. Just a couple of questions, just in relation to the figures within the report, where this is about Newport Leisure Park. It mentions occupancy of 97%. Is that by a rent roll or by metre squared? One question. Second question, we're talking about return on investment at 1.02%. Is that after we've had the hardship funding from Welsh Government? And thirdly, developing an exit strategy. I think we've done incredibly well purchasing these assets, and I think our portfolio spread across the present spread is very good, and I think they can stand up to any scrutiny and any challenge. And I would be loath for us to be forced, for us MCC to be forced to exit something which tends to be cyclical in any event. And I'd be interested to know where that development of an exit strategy is going to come from, or when it's going to come into play.
Right, thank you, Councillor. A number of points there have been raised. If you'd like to come back on that. Deborah Hill-Howells.
Thank you for those questions. I'll endeavour to answer those. In terms of the occupancy levels or the percentage, the 97%, that's based on area of occupation, so square footage. In terms of the 102 ROI, that reflects the rent roll. So that assumes that tenants will be paying in accordance with their contracted obligations within their leases. There have been some adjustments that have been made as a consequence of the CVAs. So whilst we've lost one tenant, there's been an alteration to the rent position of the other in terms of the CVA that has been agreed. And there's also been a change with another tenant as a result of the administration and subsequent assignment. So that's why that we have reduced in terms of our rent roll. And an exit strategy at the time we prepare the business case, there is an exit strategy, both for Castlegate and for NLP. At the time we wrote the exit strategy for NLP, that was obviously predicated on a well-performing asset prior to pandemic. We've reviewed that position now. We have considered what the potential costs of disposal would look like and the current market value of that asset, given the reduction in the rent roll, which we believe will be a short-term reduction. And the advice which has been taken by investment committee and agreed is that at this current moment in time, we hold on to this asset. We believe that, as you've already mentioned, that this is a short-term cyclical problem compounded by the pandemic, but the interest that we have in the vacant unit suggests to us that there will still be a long-term interest in this asset, and it is much better for us to have a fully occupied leisure park with a healthy rent roll before we would consider any exit strategy.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Deb.
Right. Thank you. Councillor Eason.
Thank you again, Chair. It's referring back to Councillor Smith's comments about the, what I say, accessibility to the committee. As members, we all get the confidential papers, the exempt papers, and they are confidential. But it's difficult to ask a question at that committee because of the confidentiality of the meeting and the fact that it should be done through leaders. But I did make some observations to yesterday's meeting in a confidential way. And that, I think, might be an opportunity to speak to the investment committee without breaching any sort of confidentiality. I think just leave a comment like that, Chair.
So it's really just an observation there on process, was that right? Yes. Okay,
Yeah,
thank
so.
you. Thank you, Councillor. I'll just give a moment then to see whether there are any further comments or observations. If not, I'd just like it to be noted that the committee has accepted the recommendations as put to us in the paper, and to thank Deborah Hill-Howells and Peter Davis for their contributions today. I'm going to move on then to the next item on the agenda, which is the 6-month update on unfavourable audit opinions, which I think will be introduced by Mr. Wathen. We're recommended that the committee should note the improvements made by service areas following the original limited assurance audit opinions issued. And if members of the committee are concerned about any of the audit opinions issued or lack of improvement made after the follow-up audit review, consideration should be given to calling in the operational manager and head of service to provide justification for lack of progress and hold them to account for future improvements. So I'd like to hand over to Mr. Wathen.
Thanks, Chairman. Members. As Chairman outlines, this is the regular report I bring to Audit Committee. It's a 6-month update on the progress of unfavourable audit opinions issued by the internal audit team. As we stand at the moment, unfavourable audit opinions equals limited opinions, and the definition of a limited opinion is set out in the appendix to this report. Just as a very brief summary, this time round, I don't intend advising members to call anybody in. There are no consecutive limited opinions which members are not aware of, and in 2021 to date we have not issued any limited opinions in our audit undertakings. So there are no major issues that members need to make note of within this report. It's merely an update of progress. So if I can just talk members through, you see in paragraph 4.3 a table of the number of limited opinions that have been issued over the last few years. And the intention is that when we issue a limited opinion, the internal audit team will go back and review the agreed action plan to see that the recommendations that have been made have been implemented to ensure that there have been improvements. And we try to do that within a 9 to 12 month period of finalising that report. So this report just gives some progress and hopefully shows members that some improvements have been made in certain areas. So for 16-17, although we've issued 8 reports, limited, 7 have been followed up and have already been given an improved opinion, which have been reported into Audit Committee previously. I've left the events one there in the table just for information, and because the nature of the service provided, large-scale events, none have been undertaken subsequently, so we've not had an opportunity to go back in and do a second follow-up. 17-18, again, 8 reports were issued with limited opinions, and 5 have been followed up and given an improved opinion, previously reported into Audit Committee. One includes the events follow-up, which I've just talked about, and then the other 2 relate to fuel cards and food procurement, which are consecutive limited opinions, and both have been called into Audit Committee, where members have been given the opportunity to challenge managers and heads of service, and those heads of service have given assurances that improvements will be made moving forward. In 18-19, 6 reports were issued with a limited opinion, and the updates are noted in the table below. Colligar Castle, 2 consecutive limited opinions, but that has been called into Audit Committee previously. Impressed Account Children's Services has now got a considerable opinion. Agency workers will be followed up in 21-22. Fuel cards follow-up. Revised opinion is now substantial. Attendance management, we're in the throes of following up that audit at this moment in time. And the health and safety of authorities' existing buildings will be followed up in 21-22. For 19-20, we issued 9 limited audit reports, and those are noted in the table below, the details of which have been reported into Audit Committee previously. Members will note that none have yet been followed up and are all due to be followed up in 21-22, so will be included in our audit plan for 21-22. But the nature of the service provided, schools, Shy Hall, Tinton Old Station, etc., have not been open for the majority of the year due to COVID, so we've been unable to go back out and revisit those particular sites or establishments. And as mentioned, within 2021, we've issued no limited opinions to date, and we've issued 5 opinions in the limited amount of audit work that we have been undertaking during the year, but no limited opinions. So no details to report in terms of any issues concerned we had with the audits. So, as I said, Chairman, the overall summary is just a very brief update. No major issues to report, and I will not be recommending to members to call any heads of service or operational managers in. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Watson. I will invite members to ask questions or make observations. To what extent would you say that this report is reflecting the effect that the pandemic has had on the ability of you to operate over the past year?
Probably quite significant, really, Chairman, because we've been unable to go out and do our site visits. We've had to rely on managers providing us information over the web, through email, internet, Teams discussions, etc. So obtaining some documentation to support and get the evidence we need to confirm that good sound controls are in place has been difficult. But the areas that we have been able to undertake have demonstrated that they have got good controls in place. So there's a bit of a mixed bag, really, but coverage is lower than expected, as I've reported into Audit Committee previously, and things will need to be carried forward into the audit plan for next year.
Thank you for that. Right, well, I don't think we do have any further questions or observations for you, Mr. Watson, so I will just note then that the committee has adopted the recommendations made in your paper, and that there is no need to call in any service managers at this point in time.
Thank you, Chairman.
So thank you for that. So the next item we have on the agenda is the audit plan for 2021 from Audit Wales, and I believe this is going to be introduced by colleagues at Audit Wales, Charlotte Owen or Rachel Freitag. Rachel.
Hi. Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to be covering the majority of the audit plan today, but Charlotte's going to chip in when it comes to the performance audit section, because we both specialise in different aspects of the audit work that we complete. So hopefully you will have had a chance to look through our audit plan. So I'm just going to pick out some of the key areas. It is a very similar document to what you will have seen in previous years in terms of layout and content, with the exception of some of the risks arising around COVID-19 this year. So the plan sets out the initial timetable for our audit work. However, we are trying to be as flexible and pragmatic as possible given the pressures facing the authority this year. In particular, the finance team are carrying a few vacancies, so we're working with them and are in regular discussion with them around the audit timetable. So I'll jump into Exhibit 1, which is the key risks facing the financial audit. I've already touched on COVID-19 resources. So we are working with the finance team to come up with a timetable. We're currently looking at receiving draft accounts at the end of June and certifying in September. This has been helped by flexibility offered by Welsh Government in the deadlines this year to complete audits, which have been extended to certification by the end of November of this year. I think the biggest risk this year is COVID funding that has been provided by the Welsh Government. there are significant material amounts of money flowing to the authority, both on a principal and an agency basis. So there's quite a bit of unpicking to do to make sure that each funding stream has been accounted for correctly, be it on an agency basis with regard to the business support grants that the authority are administering on behalf of Welsh Government, and also the hardship funding that's sort of covering the additional expenditure and lost income as a result of the pandemic. And the final risk I specifically wanted to pick up on in this exhibit was just that last year we did include some emphasis of matter paragraphs in our audit opinion. It wasn't a revised opinion, it was just highlighting some points to note. So these related to material uncertainties that were placed on the valuation of pension fund assets and property, plant and equipment valuations. So these could arise again this year. We'll just have to wait and see what the valuers say in their reports when we get them. So I'm happy to take questions on any of the other risks in this exhibit either now or at the end. But if not, I'll pass over to Charlotte to pick up on the performance audit section, and then I'll come back in after that.
Thank you. Let's go straight to Charlotte before I throw it open to wider discussion.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rachel, and thanks, Chair. Apologies for the lack of picture today. I've got problems with my camera, so sorry about that. So just to run you through the performance audit side of the audit plan. Again, the approach we want to take this year is very much a flexible one, so we can consider and respond to emerging risks throughout the year. The audit plan sets out the programme as it currently stands. So just run you through quickly the elements in that table there. So this will include continuing to discharge our duties under the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. The Auditor General has consulted audited bodies on our approach that took place last year, and he will be writing to councils over the next couple of weeks to feedback the findings on that and to set out our future approach. So I can't share very much with you today about what that future approach is likely to look like. I believe it's likely that the work will become more integrated into our other work programmes rather than being a standalone piece of work. But obviously, once we know a bit more and that letter's gone out to councils, we can share that with you. We'll also continue to audit the council's annual assessment of performance. This being the last year we're required to do so under the local government measure. We'll also continue to undertake work under our assurance and risk assessment project to identify the level of audit assurance and, where necessary, to identify areas where additional work is required to gain assurance. And this year that's likely to focus on the council's financial position, ongoing work on pandemic recovery planning, the council's preparations for the Local Government and Elections Act, and also its carbon reduction plans. We'll also be undertaking a thematic review. This will be done at all councils, looking at how they are strengthening their ability to transform, adapt and maintain the delivery of services in the context of the pandemic. Then in terms of the local projects, we recently met with SLT to discuss this and agreed that our focus in the early part of the year would be to complete the outstanding projects from 2021. And then, using the findings of the assurance and risk assessment work, we'll then consider, in conversation with the council, the scale and scope of any future local work in 21-22, and that will take into account any emerging risks at that time. So I guess compared to sort of previous years, pre-COVID, the performance audit work programme is a little bit more fluid than it would normally be. I appreciate that at this stage it means we don't have a great deal of detail to share with the committee. But it means that we will be in a position to adapt our work programme as the year progresses and that ability to respond to any emerging risks. And of course, very happy to come back to the committee and update you on the work programme as the details become a bit clearer. And I'm going to pass you back to Rachel now to discuss the fees with you. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. One thing I just wanted to point out, I suppose, is on page 12 of our report, there is reference to the 1920 grants work that we haven't actually reported to you yet. The work, I believe, was just being wrapped up last week due to delays caused by the pandemic. Our work has been, we started a bit later, so we're just about wrapping that up. So we will report to you on that in due course, likely to be at the next committee meeting. And I finally just wanted to cover our proposed audit fee. It is the same as it was last year, so it remains unchanged, but I should highlight that our fees haven't yet been ratified by the Auditor General. So in theory, they could be changed, but I think it's highly unlikely. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel. Question from Councillor Easton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rachel. Could you make a comment on the Cardiff Capital Region City deal and your work so far, as Monmouthshire is one of the constituent members of that body? You say you consider work undertaken by the Treasury, etc. Can you report anything back to us as Audit Committee this time?
So as part of our planning work, this is sort of a standard risk that is included in our audit plans, because obviously anything going on between multiple authorities does come with an added element of risk. But based on our risk assessment so far, looking at Monmouthshire in particular, we haven't identified any specific risks. It was accounted for correctly last year, I believe, so it's just something to keep on our radar. Obviously the activity of the city deal as time progresses is increasing, so the values are increasing alongside that. So it's something that we're keeping in view, really, to ensure that it is accounted for correctly. But like I said, there were no issues with the accounting for it last year that I'm aware of, so it'll just be a case of standard procedures to make sure that the council's portion of the city deal expenditure and income are correctly consolidated into the accounts.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, Rachel, as I understand it, these collaborative type ventures, ventures, they're separately audited in their own right, are they not?
Yes, they are. So we have an audit team at Cardiff Council as the host authority. They also audit the city deal accounts. So we get assurance from them internally as well that the values that are being consolidated into Monmouthshire's financial statements are correct.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. Jonathan Davis has a contribution.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Rachel for her comments, bringing forward the audit plan for next year. As Rachel correctly pointed out, we are from a financial audit side looking to progress towards a end of June deadline for bringing the draft accounts forward, which this committee will see during its July meeting. I guess it's one of the impacts of the pandemic has been on our ability to work towards our faster closure deadlines. We were making really good progress towards that prior to the pandemic, and that's just one of the unfortunate indirect impacts of it. And clearly as we get back on a more sustainable footing, we'll be looking to resurrect that. But I think as Rachel pointed out, we're looking to use the flexibilities afforded to us by Welsh Government to push back as far as possible on producing those draft accounts to allow the finance section to focus on those pressures that are still on the section from the dealing with the pandemic and the impacts of that. I think finally, Chair, just wanted to say really, quite rightly, I think the focus as we move into this year end needs to be on producing robust and accurate management reporting through to Cabinet and the relevant committees for scrutiny. We need to ensure, before we look to bring forward a draft set of accounts, we need to ensure that the authority is moving forward in a sustainable financial position. And members need to be reassured that we're moving into next financial year with the ability to deal with whatever resulting impacts remain from the pandemic and those financial impacts on the authority as we look to as those services, I guess, for the authority look to transition back to some kind of normal operating procedures. So I think that was about it from me, Chair. Just wanted to give, I guess, an MCC perspective on the audit plan. I imagine Richard Jones may want to do the same from the performance side, but I'll leave that open to him.
Well, apologies to you, Jonathan Davis. I should have formally invited you in to do that. So I'm now going to invite Richard Jones to give us his view from the performance perspective.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Rachel and Charlotte for introducing the report. From a performance perspective on the audit plan, I think Charlotte's covered the current position and our liaison work with Audit Wales on that well. I think it is important for the committee to note that there is remaining work from the 2021 performance audit plan still being undertaken, and of course when that's concluded that will be reported into the committee at the relevant point and as appropriate. And as Charlotte says, the performance audit plan completely understandably is flexible for the year ahead, and to give the committee assurance that, you know, as officers we'll be working with Audit Wales on that, and also we'll be using, you know, the various good practice and information that's shared with us by Audit Wales from some of their national and local reviews as well on an ongoing basis to inform our work. And I know Charlotte's offered to give the committee there to come back if things are more firmed up as appropriate, and obviously we'll keep you informed as well. And the final point for me would be, as a committee, you're obviously today looking at the forward work programme. You also have received previous reports from Audit Wales, and we will be putting on your work programme our progress tracker, which will allow you to look at how the council is progressing with previous Audit Wales proposals issued directly to council from previous audit work in previous years as well, which I'm sure the committee will be interested in.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that. I've got Councillor Strong would like to make a contribution.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. My query is on the charges that you're making at the end of the report, especially for the Welsh Church Fund. I'm on the panel that allocates the money, and we only, I think, have roughly £40,000 to allocate. And the charge of £6,255 for possibly about 40 applications a year seems rather excessive. So I just wondered if you could let me know how you came to that figure.
Yep. So the basis on which we charge our fees is set out in legislation, and basically we can only charge you what it costs us to complete the audit. We can't make a profit. If it costs us more, depending on why that is, we would charge you, and if it costs us less, we would charge you less. So it's basically how long it takes us and the number of hours, I suppose, it takes us to complete the work. So that's how we come up with the figures.
I see. I think the figures are exactly the same as last year, so you've done exactly the same amount of work then, you're saying?
I suppose there's a trade-off between, inflationary rises with costs that get balanced off with audit efficiencies. You know, as we become more familiar with the Church Act accounts, as we get more familiar with the remote way of working, because that will, of course, have some headaches. Last year, there is a balancing act there, and we are continually looking at ways to be more efficient. John made reference earlier to faster closing from the local authority perspective, where we're continually trying to pull our work forward to meet those deadlines. It's something that we do across all of our audits. So, we're trying to provide you the best possible level of assurance for the best value. And like I say, we're just charging you what it costs us. We're not trying to swindle you or anything like that.
No. Okay. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Did I get a request to contribute from Jonathan Davis?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. It was just a follow-up point from Councillor Strong's question there. The actual audit of the Welsh Church Fund accounts, due to the size of the Church Fund, we could potentially only carry out an inspection audit on those accounts, which would cost the fund considerably less in terms of financial outlay. But I think certainly over the past few years we've considered moving towards that and not requesting a full-blown audit from Audit Wales. But I think in terms of how the fund is set up and the fact that it involves quite a few partners from across the other Gwent authorities, we've considered it only right and proper that a full audit is carried out of those funds, and an assurance is therefore provided to those partners that procedures and the structures in place are robust, and provide an assurance to those partners that things are above board. So it's certainly something we can consider going forward, but I think we need to come back to the fund committee itself to move down that road and take that decision. But that is an option in the future. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan.
I mean, I don't know if it's my place to suggest, Rachel, but I wonder whether, within your organisation, you could look again at the Church Act fund costs. But obviously, it's going to be based on the amount of work you anticipate doing this year, rather than you have done.
Yeah.
But in the sense of if there are any efficiencies liable due to familiarity with the work, you could just look at that again and perhaps let Jonathan Davis know what your conclusions are.
Yeah, I can take that way to look at, no problem.
Yeah, I don't know whether that information could also be made available to Councillor Strong. Okay, so I'm waiting on any more comments or observations on the Audit Plan 2021.
Yeah.
We don't have a recommendation in the formal sense for this one, so I am taking this that this report is for the Audit Committee to note and ask for clarification if needed. But if there are no further comments, can I note that we've acted on that basis? So thank you very much, Rachel Freitag and Charlotte Owen from Audit Wales.
Great,
thank you. I'm going to move on then to our forward work plan. At the moment, this work plan just goes forward to May 21, so it will have to be populated for the forthcoming year, but I'm assuming that's going to happen behind the scenes. But if anyone wants to make a comment or a suggestion now, I'm happy to receive it. If not, shall we move on to the minutes of the meeting of the 25th of February? Whether there are any issues with these minutes?
Prepared to move them, Chairman.
So we've got a Councillor Higginson wants to move. We accept the minutes. Can I have a second?
Happy to second that, Chair.
Councillor Murphy. Thank you. So the minutes have been accepted, and I'll just confirm the date of the next meeting, which is going to be the 20th of May 2021. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you,
Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Chairman.